The bridge at Yanagi is a mouth of smoke and thunder, and Nakano Takeko is already inside it. Rain has not fallen in 3 days, but the air over the Nagase River tastes of iron and burnt powder, and somewhere beneath the haze, a bugle from the Imperial lines is screaming out orders in a language of violence that everyone on this bridge understands without needing translation. She grips her Naginata with both hands, knuckles white against the worn wood of the shaft. And she does not think of her mother fighting somewhere to her left, or of her younger sister crouched low behind her, waiting. She thinks only of the next breath, the next step, the next flash of a rifle muzzle in the gray morning light. A soldier lunges from the smoke. She turns her hips, lets the long blade of her Naginata carve a wide, brutal arc, and he falls before he finishes his war cry. There is no time to feel anything about it. Another takes his place, and another. Around her, the women of her makeshift army scream and strike and fall and rise again, their formal training in poetry and calligraphy replaced, in this single, unbearable morning, by the older, harder art their families never wanted them to need. Musket smoke rolls across the bridge like fog off a mountain lake, and through it, briefly, Takeko can see the castle towers of her home rising in the distance, still standing, still theirs, for now. She does not know yet that within minutes, a single bullet will end everything she has trained her entire life to become. She does not know that her final words will be spoken not to a general, not to the emperor she has never seen, but to her own sister, amid chaos. She does not know that centuries from now, people far beyond the mountains of Aizu will still speak her name. Right now, she only knows the weight of the blade in her hands, the screaming in her ears, and the terrible, magnificent certainty that she will not step back. But how did a merchant's granddaughter, a poet, a martial arts teacher's prized student, end up on this bridge, facing the modern rifles of an empire with nothing but a 900-year-old weapon and her own unbending will? To understand that, we have to go back before the smoke, back before the war, back to a quieter Japan that was already, without knowing it, dying. Takeko is born in the spring of 1847 in Edo, the bustling capital that will one day be renamed Tokyo, though no one alive yet imagines such a change is possible. Her father, Nakano Heinai, serves as an official of the Aizu domain, a proud mountain stronghold in the north, famous for producing some of the most loyal, most disciplined samurai in all of Japan. Her mother, Koko, comes from samurai stock herself, the daughter of a warrior family from the Ashikaga region. From birth, Takeko is raised inside a world built on discipline, honor, and an old code that prizes duty above comfort and loyalty above life itself. She is a serious child, sharp-eyed, quick to learn, quicker to argue. While other girls of her station are steered gently toward calligraphy, poetry, and the quiet arts expected of a well-bred samurai daughter, Takeko wants more. And in a household that values both scholarship and strength, she is allowed to pursue it. She studies literature and classical Chinese texts with real hunger, but it is the martial arts that seem to call to something deeper inside her. She is sent, still a girl, to train under Akaoka Daisuke, a respected master of swordsmanship and spear fighting. He sees something in her immediately, a stillness under pressure, a discipline beyond her years, and eventually he does something almost unheard of. He adopts her as his own daughter, folding her fully into his household and his teaching. For 5 years she trains beneath him, mastering the Naginata, the long, curved-bladed polearm that has for centuries been the signature weapon of Japan's female warriors, the onamusha, women who defended their homes and their honor when men rode off to war. Picture her in the training hall at dawn, breath fogging in the cold air, the weapon a blur in her hands as she practices the same strike 1,000 times until it belongs to her body more than to her memory. She becomes so skilled that, remarkably, she begins teaching others herself, standing before students far older than her, correcting their grip, their footing, their breath. But her life with Akaoka Daisuke does not end gently. When he attempts to arrange a marriage for her, Takeko, fiercely independent even in an age that offers women little room for such independence, chooses to leave. She returns instead to the world of her birth family, to Aizu, carrying with her a mastery of the blade that few men, let alone women, will ever achieve. If you find yourself already rooting for her, hold on. The story is only beginning, and what is coming will test everything she has learned. Beyond the walls of dojos and family homes, Japan itself is beginning to shake. For over 200 years, the country has been ruled by the Tokugawa Shogunate, a military government that has kept Japan largely closed off from the outside world, frozen in a long, careful peace. But by the 1860s, that peace is cracking. Foreign ships have forced their way into Japanese harbors. Foreign ideas have begun to seep into Japanese cities, and a growing number of powerful clans in the south have decided that the old order must fall. They rally around a new cause, restoring full power to the emperor, a young man named Meiji, and sweeping away the shogunate that has ruled in his shadow for centuries. Not everyone agrees. Loyalty runs deep in the north, and nowhere deeper than in Aizu, a domain famous for its unbending devotion to the Tokugawa cause. When war finally erupts in 1868, a conflict that will come to be known as the Boshin War, Aizu refuses to bow. And so, while the shogun himself eventually surrenders in the south, the samurai of Aizu prepare to make their stand alone, against an imperial army armed with modern rifles and modern cannon, weapons that make centuries of swordsmanship suddenly, terrifyingly obsolete. Imagine the fear settling over Aizu Wakamatsu, the domain's proud castle town, as word spreads that the imperial forces are marching north. Merchants board their windows, farmers hide their rice stores, old men sharpen blades they haven't touched in decades. And in households across the domain, women who have spent their lives keeping homes now quietly practice the Naginata drills their mothers taught them, praying they will never need to use them, knowing in their hearts that they probably will. Takeko watches all of this with something sharper than fear. She wants to fight. She believes completely that her skill with the blade is not a decoration, not a family tradition to be admired and set aside, but a real weapon that Aizu will need. She petitions to join the domain's official forces, and she is refused. Women, the senior retainers insist, do not belong on the battlefield, whatever their training. Takeko does not accept that answer. If you were told you weren't allowed to defend everything you loved, what would you do? Stay quiet or find another way? Takeko finds another way. Alongside her mother Koko and her younger sister, along with a determined handful of other women from Aizu's samurai families, she forms an unofficial fighting unit of her own. Women trained in the Naginata, ready to defend their home even without the domain's blessing. History will later call this small, fierce group the Jōshitai, the women's army, though at the time it exists almost in secret, a group of women simply refusing to be told they cannot protect what is theirs. They are mothers and sisters and daughters, women who have spent their lives inside the strict expectations of samurai society, and now, in the face of annihilation, they step outside those expectations entirely. As imperial troops close in on Aizu in the autumn of 1868, the domain's official commanders find themselves desperate for every fighter they can get. A colonel named Furuya Sakuzaimon, commanding what remains of 2 infantry regiments, finally does what the senior retainers refused to do. He recognizes Takeko's unit. He gives her formal command. It happens only one day before the battle that will define and end her life. Picture the night before. Picture Takeko sharpening her Naginata by lamplight, her sister beside her, their mother somewhere nearby preparing what supplies she can. Do they speak of fear? Perhaps. Do they speak of home? Of the life they hope waits for them on the other side of tomorrow? Almost certainly. War has a way of making the smallest, quietest moments feel unbearably precious, and this, for the women of the Jōshitai, is one of the last quiet moments they will ever share. Before we return to the battlefield, if this story has already pulled you in, stay close, because what happens next is the moment history remembers her for. Dawn breaks on October 16, 1868, over the Nagase River, near a narrow crossing called Yanagi Bridge. The imperial forces facing Aizu that morning belong largely to the Ogaki domain. Well-equipped soldiers carrying modern rifles, men trained in the new methods of warfare that are sweeping Japan even as the old methods refuse to disappear quietly. Takeko leads her women forward, Naginata raised, straight into that modern wall of gunfire, because retreat has never once entered her mind. What follows is chaos. The women's blades are old-world weapons in a new world war, but skill and desperation can still work miracles at close range. Takeko moves through the smoke like something out of legend, striking down soldier after soldier, her Naginata a blur of motion, buying time, buying ground, buying her people a few more precious minutes of resistance. Some accounts say she cuts down 5 enemy soldiers, others say 6. In the confusion of battle, no one is counting precisely, only watching in astonishment as this one woman seems to bend the fight around her sheer will. But rifles do not care about will. A shot rings out through the smoke, and Takeko is struck in the chest. She falls. The battlefield, for her, narrows suddenly to a single, desperate moment. Her sister rushes to her side, and here, in the middle of gunfire, and screaming, and the collapse of everything Aizu has fought to protect, Takeko finds the strength for one final act of will. She knows what happens to the bodies of fallen warriors on this kind of battlefield. She knows the imperial soldiers will take heads as proof of kills, trophies of victory, and she will not allow her body, her honor, to become one of them. She asks her sister to cut off her head and to carry it away so that it will never fall into enemy hands. It is one of the most painful requests one sister could ever ask of another, and her sister honors it. With help from another soldier standing nearby, the terrible task is done. Takeko's head is wrapped and carried from the battlefield, away from the smoke and the gunfire, away from the enemy who will never claim it. It is eventually brought to Hokaiji, the family temple, and buried beneath a pine tree on the temple grounds, a quiet, sacred resting place, far from the chaos of the bridge where she fell. In time, a monument will rise there in her honor, a place where, even now, people come to remember her. She was 21 years old. The castle at Aizu Wakamatsu holds on a little longer after her death, its defenders fighting through the following days with the same desperate loyalty Takeko herself embodied, before finally surrendering in November. The old world she died defending does not survive the year, but something else survives, something that outlasts empires and armies, and even the war that claimed her. If you have felt anything watching this story unfold, curiosity, admiration, grief, you are feeling exactly what the people of Aizu have felt for over a century and a half. Every autumn, in a festival held in her honor, young girls from the town dress in the armor of the Jōshitai and march in procession through the streets, keeping her memory and the memory of every woman who stood beside her alive for one more generation. Nakano Takeko is remembered today as one of the last great symbols of the samurai age, a woman who lived by a code that told her, again and again, that the battlefield was not her place, and who answered that code not with words, but with a naginata in her hands and a refusal to step back. She is often called the last woman samurai of Japan, not because there were no others like her before, but because she stood, quite literally, at the closing of an entire era, on a smoke-filled bridge, holding a blade that belonged to a world already vanishing around her. Her courage did not save Aizu. It did not stop the Empire's rifles or turn back the tide of a changing Japan. But it did something else, something that has proven, in its own way, more lasting. It gave a name and a face to every woman who has ever been told she does not belong in the fight. And it left behind a single, unshakable truth that still echoes across the centuries, that honor, once chosen, does not ask permission. If her story moved you, there are more like it waiting. Women and warriors history almost forgot, and their courage deserves to be remembered too. Stay a while longer, because the next story is just as unforgettable as this one.